Hello, Strathaven Wind Ensemble and Symphonic Band students. Today we look at Aaron Copland, an American composer. His work called Lincoln Portrait. You might expect that it's patriotic in nature, but it's got lots of complications to it. I find it particularly moving right now as we experience stay at home orders and we're quarantined and we're concerned about our country as a whole, our world as a whole. I think that this piece really is stirring, and I look forward to playing it with you. We'll be playing this next year. So when we return to school, whenever it's safe for us to have concerts again, this will be one of the first works that we perform. It was written by Copland in 1942 after the December bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. This is when the United States was gearing up for war. While war was declared on Japan and Germany and the Axis powers, it takes a while. It took a while for the American government, the American building, the American troops, the American war machine to get ready. So it wasn't like immediately the United States was engaged in full-on massive battles right after Pearl Harbor. It took some time, and it had to also, drum up support among the American people. And this was one of the things that Copland's music attempted to do. When you hear the music, it's essentially divided into three rough sections. And the first section opens mysteriously and is sort of quiet, but it signals, a lot of people think, that Abraham Lincoln, as we know, ultimately met his demise. He was assassinated while president. So he was stern, he was serious, and his presidency eventually ended with violence. So the country at the time was very, very divided from Confederacy and Union states, and the major issue, of course, was slavery. While slavery was happening, and before the Civil War, and honestly through the Civil War and beyond, there's a really popular style of entertainment called blackface minstrelsy. And this was very, very, very popular, and I mean popular, in the 1820s, 30s, right through the Civil War. Blackface minstrelsy involved troops, small groups of usually white people, 5 to 6 people or so, that would travel around the country, and they would dress up like black people. In fact, they would even take corn husks, they would burn them, so it kind of made like a tar or like a black dust, and they would rub their faces and their bodies with this so that they would look like they were black, called blackface. Blackface minstrelsy was white people pretending to be black people, but propagating stereotypes that African Americans were somehow goofy or stupid or unable to work well or lazy or really liked to drink and smoke and other vices, and were just kind of silly, almost cartoon creatures like you see here. Here's an image of the original Jim Crow. And Jim Crow was this goofy, happy-go-lucky, nothing bothered him, very simple, animal-like person. And this was kind of the stereotype in the 1800s from white people to black people. Blackface minstrelsy made fun of this. Blackface minstrelsy then was these white people acting ridiculous. There's very famous minstrelsy songs, including Dixie, which turned out to become the national anthem of the Confederate States of America. But another one you may have learned in elementary school or even now is the Camptown Races, written by a composer named Stephen Foster. Stephen Foster is one of the most famous and prolific American song composers. A lot of his music you'll recognize. He was actually a blackface minstrelsy writer in his early career. He had a change of heart and realized that slavery was really upsetting. So his music took a turn away from blackface minstrelsy songs. But he realized, though, that he wasn't making money in doing this. And so what he wound up doing was writing a hybrid towards the end of his career where his music would be for blackface minstrel shows, but it was very sentimental. And it started to portray black people as actual human beings with actual emotions, which until this time, a lot of Northerners didn't see it that way. Not that Northerners believed that there should have been slavery, but they didn't necessarily know that African American people were just as human as they. Again, propagated by blackface minstrelsy stereotypes. So here's a short snippet of the Camptown races, which Aaron Copland will quote in Lincoln Portrait. And this is an attempt to sort of set the historical background in which Abraham Lincoln had to work and had to live.
The Camptown ladies sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah. The Camptown racetrack 5 mile long, oh-de-doo-dah day. I went down there when my hat came in, doo-dah, doo-dah. I come back home with a pocket full of tin, oh-de-doo-dah day. Wanna run all night, wanna run all day. I'll bet my money on the bobtail nag, somebody bet on the bay.
It is the third and longest section of the piece that really frames the portrait of Lincoln, meaning tries to describe his character and his nature. Kind of rare, this work calls for a narrator. A narrator while the band or the orchestra is playing, and the music syncs up with the words. It's spoken word. Often, bands will have celebrities or really important political or historical figures read the text while they play. So when we play this, we will have a narrator next year. If you can think of anybody really awesome or cool or purposeful that could join us, or if you have a connection with someone quasi-famous or locally famous, please let me know and we'll get a narrator. But anyway, this is what the beginning of that sounds like.
Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. That is what he said. That is what Abraham Lincoln said. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare one or the other of us. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We here hold the power and bear the responsibility.
And Copland was proud to have found text that wasn't Lincoln's most famous. So except for the very end, a lot of this stuff was messages to Congress, journal letters, including this one here, where he says in 1862, as our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew, meaning that even in 1862, the country had changed tremendously from 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was written, and then later the Constitution was crafted, which is so interesting to think that if Abraham Lincoln thought that the country had changed so much in less than 100 years, what would he think about for us in 2020? Throughout history, this work is included in inaugural celebrations for presidents, patriotic events, but it was famously pulled in 1953 from Dwight D. Eisenhower's inauguration, and politics kind of became part of the decision. Aaron Copland was famously liberal or leftist in his political thinking, and so Eisenhower's Republican administration did pull it from their reception and their celebration. It is patriotic in the sense that it quotes Abraham Lincoln, who we often think about as being one of the most patriotic figures in the United States. It's troubling because it does quote blackface minstrelsy songs, which we have learned is part of our musical vernacular. But is it patriotic? It's complicated, I think, and most things we come across are not very clear. There's always a tinge of historical inaccuracies, surprise, but a lot of it comes down to our own personal interpretation. What I love about the end of this piece and what Abraham Lincoln said in his Gettysburg Address applies so much to what we deal with right now and during our stay-at-home issues and quarantine. That Abraham Lincoln, even in the middle of the 1800s, said what we think right now, that despite all the issues that happened to us and unfortunately the illness that befalls so many of our friends and family, that this government and the people, meaning the Americans, by the people and for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of these United States, is everlasting in the memory of his countrymen. For on the battleground at Gettysburg, this is what he said. He said that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause to which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth.